We're back with our power panel for the day, Ron Coleman, Matt Tyrmand, and Auron MacIntyre. So let's talk about Veepstakes. Kamala Harris has said that she's going to select her VP on or before next Tuesday, and that running mate will be with her at a rally in Pennsylvania. Interestingly, whether or not that signals Governor Josh Shapiro or not remains to be seen. But the Daily Wire was actually talking about a poll this morning on Morning Wire that was talking about enthusiasm for both the Democrat and the Republican base. It is, of course, up for the Democrats from 62% only for Joe Biden up to 88% for Kamala Harris, contrasting that with an 82% for Republicans. So Auron MacIntyre, does the Veepstakes actually matter in terms of this bubble bump for Kamala Harris?
Seems incredibly unlikely. Harris is a horrible candidate. She has never been liked. She has never won a primary. She was polling at like 3% when she dropped out originally in 2020. She's just someone who has no energy. And the more she's on stage, the more that people are aware of who she is and how vapid and how terrible she is, are only going to sour on her. Right now, she has this incredibly artificial bump, entirely manufactured by the media. There's no grassroots to this. This is all a bunch of white dudes for Kamala Harris type Skype calls that have, a bunch of guys in a struggle session. Who is that convincing? And I don't see how any vice presidential pick is going to change that. When you have a candidate that bad, you don't want to put an exciting vice presidential pick behind that person. That's just going to make it clear how unqualified the person who's actually running is. And since Harris is already facing accusations of basically just being a DEI candidate, you certainly don't want to put someone super competent behind her and remind everybody, oh yeah, she's only here because she checked the right boxes because Joe Biden was an old man who was white and checked out when he ran the first time.
Yeah, Ron Coleman, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And there's a reason that the Democrats didn't orchestrate their coup for their replacement candidate until there only is less than 100 days now until the election, and early voting starts in less than a month. So Kamala Harris doesn't have to be super convincing for that long of a time period. I mean, she certainly hasn't been running as long as Donald Trump has been in this particular race. But I think there's a reason why the Democrats are trying purposefully to compare her to the enthusiasm and energy of Barack Obama in 2008. Do you think that that's going to be effective? And can she get a VP that will help that endeavor?
Well, as Auron said, this is all a game. The people who are swearing that they've never been more excited in their lives would swear if Joe were still in office also. These are the same people who told us that he was as sharp as a tack. There are very few people.
Shots fired at Harry Sisson, but sure. Okay.
She's simply not, she's not a good candidate. I think that the idea of her bringing in Shapiro is, I think I could be the one to say it. The fact that Shapiro is Jewish will not play well in the Midwest. It's not what they need to counterbalance JD Vance. It would be a huge mistake for them. Why they're doing it in Philadelphia, if it's not Josh Shapiro, is beyond me. Or wherever it is in Pennsylvania. But I don't think the VP stakes is going to make a difference. I think JD Vance is a great and unregretted, talk about spin, I assure you, an unregretted choice by Trump.
So let's talk about that, Matt, because, so there are suggestions that kind of the top three contenders here are either Gretchen Whitmer, governor of Michigan, Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, or Senator Mark Kelly out of Arizona, all of those, coming from states that ultimately matter. So who do you think the pick is going to be, and will there be a debate between that individual and JD Vance?
Well, don't forget Tim Walz. The Tim Walz fan club has been pushing Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, the leftiest state in the country that Mondale won in '84, the only one that Reagan lost. There's, Kamala, everything that both Auron and Ron said earlier about Kamala is accurate. Horrible candidate. They've been hoisted on their own DEI petard. They created a debate months before the nomination to force the exit ramp after most of the primaries were over. And now you're stuck with Kamala. I'm actually not convinced Kamala will be the candidate. I think that until the delegates actually vote on the convention, Trump opens up 10-point leads in every swing state. The Dems are ends justify the means, win at all costs. And she is a loser who not only could lose that race, but also affect down ballot ballot. You've got independent, relatively moderate, appealing to independent type governors, especially two Dems in Republican states with Roy Cooper in North Carolina, Andy Beshear in Kentucky. What Trump did, and I know for a fact from sources inside, that Trump hadn't decided on JD Vance until the Monday morning after the shooting, thinking he was on a glide path, and said, you know what, I can quadruple down in MAGA instead of, tent expanding, uniting with a more establishment type figure like a Marco Rubio, or of which there are a plethora of others. And I think it's actually not too helpful. I love Ron Coleman. He's one of my favorite people in the world, but I think JD is a horrible candidate, 39 years old, not ready for prime time. He was in fourth place in the Ohio primary until that endorsement came in with 2 weeks ago and won by a hair. He does not translate well. He is the Republicans' Barack Obama, constructed in a lab in Silicon Valley and AEI in D.C., who then went back to Ohio and deleted his entire history of condemning MAGA. He is a construct, and I think most Americans get that. He's not taken very, very seriously, except if you go to the Edmund Burke Foundation NatCon events, which is a very small segment of the actual voting electorate of the American right. So I don't think he's going to help much at all.
Yeah, and honestly, I tend to agree with you, Matt, that if Trump had known for certain that Biden was going to be replaced, I think the Democrats did that purposefully after the VP selection, we probably would have seen a different VP selection. At least, I would assume so, because Trump is very strategic, and yet he is likely stuck with JD Vance. And so, Auron, who do you think that the Harris campaign, if she ultimately is the candidate selection, I don't see how the Democrats can reasonably replace her. I mean, I think they're putting all of their eggs in that basket. But if she is ultimately the nominee, who makes the best sense to at least for the Democrats try to balance out her ticket? I don't see two women, frankly, being very persuasive on that front.
Yeah, you do feel like Whitmer probably loses out in that, and you do have somebody like Shapiro, as Ron pointed out. Yeah, I don't think that really helps them hedge the bets the way that they'd hope to. Anyone who's been paying attention to the direction of the Democratic Party is not going to be suddenly swayed by the idea that they put Shapiro on the ticket, and he won't help in the states that they probably really want him to. Ultimately, I don't think that it, again, matters that much who's going to be the vice president for Kamala or for Trump. That's why I think Vance was ultimately a good pick, though. To be fair, I am one of those people who spoke at the Edmund Burke event. But I do think he's a great pick for the reason that he is insurance. Let's be really frank here. The left tried to murder Donald Trump. They tried to splatter his brain on television in front of everybody. And a pick like JD Vance lets the people who did that know, lets the people who encourage that know, the people who are still wishing for that know that the movement is not just Donald Trump. There's somebody behind him who is just as scary to them. And if they go ahead and try to take another swipe at Trump again, you will simply have a young, spry guy who has the same, if not more terrifying ideas for the left right behind Trump. He is insurance, and he's good insurance. He should be there.
Well, we'll have to see the results of the assassination attempt task force and whether they actually get to some of those answers of who was really responsible. And, it's interesting that the former Secret Service director, that was the only thing that she could absolutely answer, was that there was no coordination with anyone else. I find that to be a little disconcerting, and I don't quite believe it. But we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight to talk more about JD Vance and the GOP messaging. Well, the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 and that conservative cohort for policy and personnel for the presidential transition has ultimately met its demise, even though Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts is suggesting that it's already done what it set out to do, regardless of Donald Trump distancing from that. But the Trump campaign put out a statement following the head of Project 2025 is stepping down. And this is what they had to say yesterday. Trump campaign statement on Project 2025's demise. President Trump's campaign has been very clear for over a year that Project 2025 had nothing to do with the campaign, did not speak for the campaign, and should not be associated with the campaign or the president in any way. Reports of Project 2025's demise would be greatly welcomed and should serve as notice to anyone or any group trying to misrepresent their influence with President Trump and his campaign. It will not end well for you. That was signed by Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita. And Representative Chris Lonsdale quote tweeted this and said this in response: Trump's top 2 advisors gleefully cheering for the demise of a good faith attempt by Heritage to try and resolve the personnel issues that plagued Trump's first term in office. Heritage and Project 2025 never claimed to speak for the campaign, and Chris and Susie know that. Unreal. Let's bring back our power panel for commentary. We have Ron Coleman, Matt Tyrmand, and Auron MacIntyre rejoining us. So, Auron, let's go to you first. I find this whole scenario just a little bit leaning into the leftist targeted messaging. I mean, Trump could have very easily just said, hey, we have Agenda 47. We're hearing from a lot of different groups, but I'll just point you to my agenda without actually taking a direct swipe at Heritage and the 110 organizations, conservative organizations that genuinely want to help.
Yeah, this is a bizarre scenario. You hope that Heritage would have kept things more tightly under their hat, but also the Trump response hasn't been great. I don't know all of the internal details and all of the machinations, but from the outside, it seems like the Trump camp discovered this or had to answer for this and simply got frustrated because it was developed in parallel and they didn't actually have control over the messaging. They didn't want this to become an albatross around their neck. And ultimately, I think Trump is the kind of guy who gets offended when someone else is using his name to go ahead and create a project that he didn't necessarily build on. I think ultimately the work of Project 2025 is important. One of the critical failures of the Trump administration's first go around was its inability to properly staff and recognize that personnel is policy. And so the database that they've built, the resource that they have there for the president, is something that he should utilize, whether he publicly distances himself from the agenda or not. However, there are plenty of things involved in the Heritage Foundation's creation of Project 2025 that are in the face of what Donald Trump wanted, and they are not the ones driving this thing. I have heard good things about the direction that the Heritage Foundation is going, but ultimately it's not like they aren't a legacy foundation that is based in much of the Washington conservative movement. So many people inside the Trump movement are not a fan of. So I wouldn't have taken this tack, but I think you can kind of understand why this generated the animus from the Trump campaign that it did.
Well, Matt, let's talk about personnel being policy, because, a lot of the people that were at the helm of Project 2025 were former Trump administration personnel that were with him since 2016. And you have this statement that, frankly, they're trying to kind of sound like the mob bosses, which I found just utterly laughable. But, Chris LaCivita, who's now the campaign manager, I mean, he was out there tweeting right after January 6th of 2021, asking for Donald Trump to be tried for treason. And now he finds himself as the campaign manager. I mean, this kind of clash to me, it just suggests that Trump really hasn't learned his lesson, and his toxic trait, quite frankly, is to put people who hate him in positions of power while abandoning the conservatives like the Heritage Foundation and others that have a track record of conservative policy and genuinely want to help.
As long as they are on a front-facing basis, showing just direct adulation to Donald Trump, then you're in his good graces. You had, Dina Powell, you had Gary Cohn, you had Dems in the administration, in the White House last go-around. This whole Project 2025 imbroglio is precisely why we can't have nice things. 110 conservative groups, many hundreds of conservative activists who have been at the absolute tip of the spear fighting for MAGA in all of its forms over the last 8 or 9 years, thrown under the bus as if to say Heritage is making their money off saying we're going to fill Trump's administration. They are doing very important work. They have for decades. Heritage is a 501c3. They're not coordinating with the campaign. They raise $100 million a year. They've been around since like 1978. They've got the largest email and mailing list in the entire American right, conservative, neocon, every form of the right. Heritage is the 800-pound gorilla. So smacking at it does no service to the American right. Yet here we are. Agenda 47 is much smaller. You also have the sinecures at AFPI and all of those sort of brotherly organizations where they will cease to exist when an admin launches because they will be drained of talent back in. So
we got to wrap here, Matt, and apologies to Ron Coleman. We'll get to you next time, but that's all the time we have for Jenna Ellis tonight. Make it a great night.